Hello, welcome to Walpole United WFC. Hello and welcome to Walpole United with me, John Foster, MUFC. Got so much to get through tonight. It seems like the last 2 or 3 days there's been quite a bit of news here and there, and Twitter's blowing up. You got the squad message along the bottom. We've got Rob on tonight talking a bit about Chelsea and how they managed to clinch the championship. Is that the right word, clinch? Oh, I don't know about that. We'll get Rob's thoughts on that shortly. Senior Brun and Onibache has been on Twitter today. Obviously, they're not training at United. I'm not looking into that too much, to be honest. The United season's over. They're looking at internationals. However, once Honor's back home, is she going to be settled? Does she want to come back to Manchester again? We'll look at that as well. And Conor Solskjaer has actually left us permanently to go to a League Two Norway side. Just makes me think that Ollie's done the right thing. He stayed with his daughter until the end of the season, and now maybe it's time to go back home. So lots of things to get into there. Second part of the show, we're going to talk a little bit about 5 things that United need to do over the summer to close the gap on the likes of Chelsea and City and Arsenal. So we've got 4 points in mind, and Rob, you've got about half an hour to think of maybe 1 point on how United need to close the gap. So yeah, lots of things to look forward to. We've got 12 people watching already, loads of people in the comments. Let's say hello to a few people. Conor, I know you got a bad throat, but how you doing, mate?
Yeah, I think me and you, John, when we were messaging, I'm like a phone battery. So if you imagine me as a phone battery percentage, I'm about 45% now. So I'm getting there. But we'll see how the show goes.
Oh, well, it's very similar to me. When I get a cold, it usually affects my throat, and I've missed a few shows purely because of a bad throat. But thank you for joining us, Conor. Rob, how you doing, mate? You okay?
Yeah, I'm still pretty good, actually. It's been a productive after Saturday's disappointment against Wolves. It's been a productive few days for the real Chelsea, and then the Chelsea that I can't rely on anymore. So, but thankfully they did the business yesterday, and have put Leeds right in there. And I'm sure we're all. I speak on behalf of everyone when I say we're very sad to see Leeds in the relegation zone, potentially going down to the Championship again.
Conor might have a different way of looking at that, but no, I thoroughly get that. And Alina was supposed to be with us today, but she's currently stuck at the airport, so if she can be with us, she will be. If not, we'll definitely get her one at another point, but she might pop up, so just bear with us. But yeah, Conor, let's just start off with yourself briefly, just on the news over the last 2 or 3 days. So obviously Conor leaving us, Honor and Brun, Twitter's going a little bit crazy, as always, as soon as they see a photo of those pair, let alone the photo of those away from Manchester. But just your thoughts on that, first of all, Conor.
Conor made sense. I think that's not going to be the first dev I don't think you see move on. We speak about this a lot when we talk about the devs. They're in that weird, they're too good for that level, but they're not quite maybe there yet to make the jump to where we are in the WSL, maybe a low WSL side. Even then, it's going to be tough. So it's probably the right move. Take the family, fully back home now, because obviously I believe they were split. I think the mum and the other kid were over in Norway, and Ollie and obviously Conor were over here. So obviously reunite over there. So it made sense. Gets game time. That's the main thing. And who knows? It'll be a step. She's not going to finish her career there if she's as good as we think she is. That's just a stepping stone for her, and it will lead her on maybe into Europe, and she might come back. We don't know that. She might come back in the future. In terms of the Honor and Senior Brun stuff, I don't read anything into that. They're just training away. Honor's, I hear what you're saying at the start, where will she settle back in Spain? She might do, but she's got to come back here for the Euros anyway. So it's not that much different. So yeah, I don't read too much into that. I'm just glad they're, I think Jamie Spence put it, nearly the whole squad have gone away on holiday. They're still training away, and, fair play to them, because they could quite easily go, you know what, no, I want to relax for a bit and go away and have a holiday, but they didn't. They've gone back, and fair play to them. So no, I don't read anything to that. I expect Honor's tough. Honor's the one. I think this it opens up a bigger conversation about United in general in terms of the lack of news that's come out around all of the contracts, because everything they post about certain players is getting picked up on. So you could, like you said, you could just tweet a picture of them on a sun lounger, and there'd be people analysing the type of sun lounger, where's it from, and everything else, because that's how desperate everyone is. That's how desperate everyone is for contract news. So, yeah, I don't read too much into it personally.
Yeah. Rob, the Chelsea players, do you know what they're up to now? They're celebrating. Obviously, they got a cup final to look forward to.
Yeah, I mean, mainly is that. From what I understand, there may have been one or two glasses of shandy consumed on the Sunday evening in celebration to it. But yeah, no, I think until Sunday it is very, very focused. It was made pretty clear after the game when Emma Hayes stayed back and sort of did her end of season address that, she views the end of the season as being next Sunday. And then once that finishes, a real celebration can happen. Personally, I'm, all for that. At the end of the day, I don't view the season as done yet. I think Chelsea would be disappointed if they sort of, treated Sunday as after the Lord Mayor's show. And I think also on a personal level, they will want to get revenge on Manchester City after the Conti Cup final. So I think there's also that added element sort of spice to it. But I'm sure, afterwards, I'm sure there will be a celebration. But at the end of the day, a lot of them will want to keep themselves in good, working order because a lot of them will be expecting to go to the Euros, and certainly those that, are maybe sort of on the cusp of squads, if they're keeping themselves in, the best form and shape possible, then they give themselves best chance of being, that late call-up or that surprise name in the squad.
Yeah, 100%, yeah. You was at the game and you would have saw your youngsters come at half-time as well, under 16s. What were your thoughts when you saw those parade their trophy? Because we had something similar with our development team winning their trophy under 16s for yourself.
Yeah, firstly, at the point, I should say congratulations both to the development side and also to Manchester United's men's FA Youth Cup side. I think, it was great to see a full stadium yesterday at Old Trafford. Besides, one or two bits of contentious refereeing, which isn't, a debate for now, I think it's fair to say that United, to their credit, looked like the better side from what I've read. I didn't watch the game, but, you get to a cup final. By that point, all you need to do is win it. Again, for the dev side, I did see bits of that. And I think it's fair to say that I've said this about Chelsea's dev side. A lot of our youngsters, our really good ones, tend to go out on loan very, very early. And I think United maybe have the opposite, where a lot of them are still at the dev side. And consequently, I think, that did show a little bit because we had a lot of sort of 17, 16-year-olds playing. But at the same time, I think it's also a note that generally the quality is improving and the standard is getting better and better. And that sort of has to be factored in. Yeah, it was great to sort of see the under sort of 16s going around. I mean, hopefully, all I will say is I hope all these young players, whatever happens, they find their place in the footballing pyramid and they don't just, drop out of it and become statistics. That's my belief on all young players, that every young player in football finds a pathway in the sport, whether it's they end up, taking another career and playing semi-pro or playing Sunday League, or they become a pro at whatever level. That, I think, is the most important thing because it is a very tough journey. And there was a really good article, I think, on The Athletic recently about, young players when they get released at 18. It can be quite a crushing sort of moment. And I think that's something general the FA needs to work better on in just sort of offering that pathway. And even if it's a case, I spoke to some youth sort of women's players that are now training up as referees, for example, and they've been youth players. They haven't quite made the grade, but they're becoming referees. And I think if you've played at a level, a fairly decent, young competitive level, and you become a referee, you've got more of an idea than, say, referees that haven't played the game.
Do you ever worry, like, with the Chelsea squad being so big and so good individually, and obviously as a team as well, but more precisely individually, that some of your youngsters won't ever come through? And I'm not saying that in a bad way, because if they're good enough, they'll come through. But it's such a big gap, isn't it, from your under 16 and your devs to Champions League contenders? Yeah,
I mean, it's one of those things. I think, like, I've sort of been quite honest on this, in that if a player is good enough, the pathway will be there. In my opinion, I think, Emma Hayes has made it clear, for example, with people like Georgia Fox, where she sort of was starting to make first appearances, and she went out to get regular minutes, not because she wasn't good enough, but because the club didn't want her sitting around playing development football. The same with Emily Orman at Crystal Palace. She had the unenviable task of sitting behind Berger and Musovic in the sort of pecking order, and that isn't, an easy thing to do. I do think, we are starting to see a gradual general shift of sides starting to use their academies more and more because they have to, do that. And I think in order for the game to grow further, that needs to be the next step, is a reliable pathway of young players coming through into the sides. But I think at the same time, I don't want minutes just to go out for charity. I spoke to Amy Claypole's father, Rich Claypole, earlier in the season after she made her debut against Aston Villa in the FA Cup. And he sort of said those minutes by Emma Hayes were given out, not because, she needed to give the minutes out. There were other players on the bench she could have brought on, but she gave the minutes out to the young players because they'd earned them and they deserved them. And that's what I think people need to, often remember. And this is the same, I think, at United, because I know there's been a lot of clamouring for some of the younger players to maybe get chances. The minutes have to be earned. And if you just give them to a player without them really feeling like they've earned it, then you can set them up sort of, to fail in a way.
Yeah, I think just quickly, John. I think Skinner said something similar at Reading away. That now these players didn't get on, but I think Kira Barry and Neve Murphy were both on the bench, and one of the first things he said in his interview was they're not there because of their names, or they're not there, they've earned that. And same when Kana Solskjaer came on against Bridgewater, it wasn't because she's a Solskjaer, it's because of how well she's done. And it's important for the managers to come out and say that rather than, it's great to give them minutes. No, they've earned that slot. They're not just getting given it because they're through the academy.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we'll talk a bit about the game, and obviously Chelsea becoming champions, and then we'll move it on a little bit. Conor, start off with yourself. Obviously, we was there. It was a little bit later to the game compared to usual. We were usually there about an hour and a half before any game, but one thing and another, we just seemed to be a little bit later. But we still stood with the rest of the United fans. We actually got a bit of a suntan. It was a lovely day. But yeah, I mean, just your thoughts on the actual atmosphere itself. I know you've been to Kings Meadow before, but not quite. It didn't look quite full, but it was still a good atmosphere from both sides, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's a nice little ground for where it is. I don't like the location. I don't think anyone does, just because you cannot park anywhere near it. You got to find someone's house like we did to park on half a mile away. So yeah, other than that, it was a good atmosphere from where we were, and ultimately, for an away, I'm blurring out here, for an away end, I'm just going to go with it. For an away section, it was fine for what it was, viewing wise. Obviously, if any attacks that came down the left hand side, we could not see because of the scaffolding, because of the cameraman above us, and everything else that people you just cannot see down that end, which is what it is. So I would have liked us to have been behind the goal where we were in the Conti Cup, but that was never going to be the case with Chelsea winning the title, because they needed that stand for obviously the Chelsea contingent take up as well. So yeah, I thought the atmosphere was good. Obviously, it just felt like a good last game of the season. It was loud from both sets of fans. I know we gave Chelsea fans a lot of stick, but it was a decentish. At least that's probably the first game I've been to all season where you can see the opposition fans trying. At least the Chelsea fans were trying to, especially that guy on our right with the celebrations tin. I think he was hitting for his drum. He was drumming, and obviously opposite us as well, opposite the dugouts as well. So like you said, sun was out. It was good pitch, good quality game. It just felt like a very good last game of the season. Sky got exactly what they wanted. High quality game, sun out, crowd loud as ever. So yeah, atmosphere wise, I don't think you could have got much better than that.
Rob, your thoughts on where were you sitting and standing?
So I was in my usual sort of spot in with the supporters group, which is directly opposite the dugout, almost like directly in line sort of with the halfway line. And that's sort of my usual sort of spot. I usually go in there because we get sort of about 200, 300 of us in the supporters group, and we tend to be the ones setting the tempo and getting the noise sort of going. But I will say, individual atmosphere-wise, and I'm not comparing them because I think comparing atmospheres is silly, but in terms of like the general wave of atmosphere and the level of how it continued, that's the best atmosphere I've been in since when Chelsea played Napoli in 2012 at Stamford Bridge and turned that Champions League tie around. That night, I still, remember that night. The Napoli fans were ridiculous. They brought a couple of sort of massive, great drums from Italy, and the entire, noise around Stamford Bridge. It was a sort of cacophony, especially when the fourth goal went in. But before I continue waxing lyrical about that, I think generally it was a really good atmosphere. I think, it was another argument and another good case study as to why away ends in the WSL are necessary, why they just make sense if we want to grow it more. I will say I was pleased to actually see us using the East Stand, because for a lot of this season, bizarrely, it's been out of access. I was told at one point it was due to COVID and then something to do with the scaffolding. I'm not really sure why. It seems to be, people being jobs worse. But it was good to, have that there. Again, I do think, there needs to be a consistent away end selected and a consistent sort of area that's created.
Just quickly, the atmosphere as well. Just from what I saw, and obviously you can see it on the replay for the third goal, Brighton, I think it was, that scored it. You can tell how much. Obviously, it meant a lot because that was the turnaround. That was to make it 3-2. But you could tell how much the crowd energy meant. I thought she was going to launch herself into the stand. The way she ran up to the crowd, I thought she's going to launch herself in. But that's what you get when the crowd are bringing the energy as well. It really you can see it. It pumps the players up, and you could see it on her face. Like I said, fair play, because you don't really see that in women's football. A lot of players going up to the crowd. They kind of for reasons and all those kind of things. But she proper ran up to the crowd. I thought that's because of the energy of the place. It's been such a pressure cooker in here, like both sets of fans going at each other. That release of it reminded me of Russo's goal against City in the league earlier in the season when we went 2-1 up. That release of just tension, it's brilliant. And that obviously I hated it because it put Chelsea 3-2 ahead. But I think if you're watching that as just a neutral fan, that was good to see.
I will also say on that, like, Brighton was quite honest, like that last year has been a difficult year for her, and also a lot of the players said at the end of the season when we had that big win against Reading to seal the title, it felt very weird because there wasn't any crowd in there. And obviously I think we can all agree that COVID stadiums was terrible for both from a fan perspective but also from a player perspective. I think the quality of the game does diminish when it's empty stadiums, just because players do feed off that energy. And I think it's exactly sort of right in saying that they sort of fed off of it. I mean, I personally think, and again, obviously we'll sort of discuss it in more detail, but I don't think Sam Kerr, for example, tries that second goal and goes for that if it's an empty stadium. I don't think she goes for it if it's empty, because I think, there's that wave of noise and obviously that expectation of sort of, is she going to shoot? I don't think that's necessarily there.
Yeah, and just my thoughts on it, and I'm sort of it to Connor and Andrew on the way home. What I was really impressed with is being at a stadium, and I'm including Leeds Sports Village in this as well, where the atmosphere is coming from more than just one section. So obviously at Leeds Sports Village, you've got us, and potentially we are the loudest group pound for pound. However, it very much comes from just our section, whereas at Kings Meadow, on the right hand side we had it. I heard of you. I didn't realise that was your group, but obviously you was giving it as well. And then on the other side where Ben Gilby's been on the show a few times. It was. I think that must have been a bit quieter over that way. I don't know if that's just because we was furthest away from it, so we might not have heard it. But generally, pretty much all the way around the stadium was giving some atmosphere, and it was great to see. So obviously, Rob, champions. What are your assessments of the season?
Well, I mean, I think it's one of those where, like, I came into it and I wrote an article back at the beginning of the year for Her Football Hub saying why Chelsea wouldn't be champions this season. I intend to write a similar one on why we won't win the UWCL next year. But I sort of wrote an article on it, and I sort of said at the time that, I think there's a lot of things that Chelsea need to get right this year and they don't have right. And it was sort of a combination of a couple of things, I think, coming together at the right time. Number one, Emma Hayes finally realised that there's something magical called squad rotation, and that you can not just play your preferred 11 every single week. The fact that we were able to actually sensibly call on minutes for, say, Beth England, Jessie Fleming, Jisoo Young, Drew Spence, Jonna Anderson, Maren Mielda, Aniek Nouwen, and sort of use them, even Zakira Musovic, and use them all regularly. It massively meant that there wasn't the toll on the legs that we've seen previously. Number two, and I think this is partly on it, Arsenal's own naivety and the game against Birmingham, I think, is going to be burned in their mind, because they went into that match. I remember watching that match. They went into it with a complacency, and as soon as Birmingham scored that early goal, you sometimes see this in the WSL where teams concede early and surprise rate, and sometimes they'll come back and just absolutely steamroll someone. And we've seen that, before. We saw that with City at times this season. But Other times they will concede early and then they'll just be caught like a rabbit in the headlights. We saw it for Chelsea against Reading in that game earlier in the season. At no point did we ever look like turning that round. And I think as soon as that game happened and it came out of Arsenal's hands, at that point, from that point mentally, the title was won. The moment when I think probably I realised the title was won was that Sam Kerr goal against Aston Villa. Like, I know at the time a lot of people mocked her for that celebration and sort of said, why is she doing that for? I think it was at that moment Sam Kerr knew, right, we're going to win this. And we're going to go on and win this. And to be honest, I was kind of surprised and a little disappointed the same celebration didn't come out on Sunday. I sort of speaking after the game to the players, they were a little surprised as well. They thought the flip might have come out as well because she sometimes does save that for special occasions. But I think, Chelsea having that mentality in the squad and also going to games like the Spurs away game where we were down to 10 players and, 1-0 down and turned it around. Things like that, having that mentality in them, that sheer bloody mindedness, I think that's ultimately why we won the title. I do think that there is, room to improve and there is room to step on. But considering that this is a squad in transition by Emma Hayes' own admittal, I don't necessarily think she would have expected to win the title this year. So I think, the fact they've done it this year and there's now another year of experience, people like Jess Carter, who's still 24, Aniek Nouwen, who's 24. Zakira isn't that old as a goalkeeper. You've got Erin Cuthbert, Nim Charles, Jessie Fleming, that are all still such young players. Lauren James, also Alina. There is that core building around that squad. And having already won stuff, it sort of is only bodes well for the future because as soon as you win one trophy, you get the itch for it and you want to keep winning and winning and winning.
There is one thing that you mentioned there, Rob, and I will just ask you. He says the goal against Villa is kind of what made you think, okay, the title's in your hands and you've won it.
Yeah.
Was there at any point on Sunday where you're thinking, oh, hang on, we need to score 2 goals now to make sure that we win it? Because it wasn't having it all your own way at that point, at least.
Yeah, I mean, in all honesty, no, because I trust the squad so much. And, I knew there were so many good players in the sort of squad. I mean, for example, when we're looking at a side that by pound for pound, I think can leave England's, personally, in my opinion, best centre-forward on the bench and, can leave Korea's all-time appearance maker on the bench, lead Canada's sort of best player on the bench, and still at the same time we're starting one of Norway's best players, the record Danish goal scorer, and, one of the top strikers, if not the top striker in the world on form, then, there's so much options. And I think just having that, assurance in the squad and that sort of mentality, it meant that, I did. Obviously, there's that creeping doubt in the back of your mind that I think there is any time where you're like, what if we do F it up? But at the same time, I think that was more superseded by the confidence and also the fact that, there was such a good atmosphere in Kings Meadow. I don't think they let that dip. I will say, from a United point of view, the thing I think they got wrong and the real criminal mistake was right after half-time letting Chelsea attack because they dropped off as soon as the second half started. You saw the line drop, and that meant that Nim Charles could push up, and suddenly when she's pushing up, you can push Beth England into that space. And that first cross all came from that space that wasn't there in the first half. That Blundell, because she'd sort of come up to try and deal with Nim Charles, because Charles had pushed up into the space, there's space in behind. And that then means, the cross comes in. Obviously, I've seen criticism of Earps for this first goal. I think that's incredibly harsh because I don't think many people expect Sam Kerr to take that volley. The argument I would be making is, and again, this is perhaps a bit harsh, why is there not a midfielder closing her down? Someone throwing their body on the line in order to block that? Because I think there was almost an element of naivety, maybe complacency, that it wasn't going in, or perhaps, just sheer surprise at the effort being taken on. And I think once Chelsea got it back to parity with the nature of the side they had out there, it was only ever going to be one outcome.
Yeah. Conor, what are your thoughts on Chelsea champions? I think there was like a 2-horse race pretty much the whole time. The City was never in it. Spurs was never going to maintain their run. And, we knew at some point we was probably going to falter, maybe not as falter as much as we have, but it was always going to be one of those two, wasn't it?
Yeah, I didn't actually think it was going to be Chelsea, but obviously I didn't predict Arsenal to lose to Birmingham. So, like Rob said, I think that's where it turned around. It's just an incredible team, as we were unfortunately watching the Chelsea team lift the trophy. And every player they were leading out, one by one, and picking up their medal or whatever. I was like, yeah, I'll take her at United. I'll take her at United. I'll take her at United. Every single player. And it was just like, it was getting to the point. I hate it because like I want to be watching our play, and I love all the players that we've got, and we've got a brilliant squad, a brilliant foundation. But I think when you look, I know we're going to talk about the difference, in where what we need to do to bridge the gap. But I think when you look at some of the player, I mean, you just look at like Brighton, for example, in that game. I mean, it's just phenomenal. And look at Aaron Cuthbert, for example, the work rate is just something else. And I look at some of those players, and I think that's the difference. And like Rob said there, I think I said to you, John, at half time, if we can get through the first 15, 20 minutes, I think we'll be all right and we might nick a draw from this. But I said, if we concede early on, we're going to get battered. And what happened literally a minute into the second half, we concede and it's just domination for the next 15, 20 minutes. And then the game was over. Then we were never going to score two. I think we had 2 shots in that second half. Yeah. So that's the difference. So they're worthy champions, and it's just any team, and you look at City, they've done it as well, that can go on a winning run like that. I don't know how many games it is. It's a long old run. I don't know when the last time Chelsea lost was. But any team that can do that.
We lost to Reading in December. So I think it was 14. I think that was match day 8. So I think 14 games unbeaten.
That's what I mean. Any team that can do that are worthy champions. And I think Rob said there, it's not like they've steamrolled most teams. They've had to work for it. You look at Birmingham away, 1-0. You look at Spurs, like as you mentioned there, with the red card to come from and win that. Villa, as you mentioned, late on. They're crucial wins. That's something that United have not found yet. We've not found that way to win in the games that are so tight. Then it's the small differences. Teams like Chelsea will find that, you'll get a Sam Kerr late goal. You'll hang on to a 1-0 lead towards the end. That's the difference. So, yeah, they're just a good squad. And I think Emma Hayes as well, as much as we like to give her a stick, I think she showed again. You just look at the half. We all said I said to you, that's the first thing I said to you, John. There's no way Emma Hayes is going to go in there without changing something. 2 subs come on, the whole system change it, and look what happened. So I think you've got to give credit there.
I can share something interesting that was told by one of the players at half time about Emma Hayes. So Emma thought Sam had a poor first half, and I had to agree. And she felt like she really needed to rile her up. So she apparently went over and told Sam Kerr that Arsenal were winning 3-0 and Miedemar had a hat-trick. And suddenly the golden boot was in jeopardy. And the players told me this. I've got no reason to doubt them. But they sort of said after that point, like Sam basically just sat there for a minute in the dressing room and then came out and was basically sort of roaring in the tunnel. And I get the feeling that is the sort of thing that would rile up Sam Kerr. She is someone who doesn't show it a lot, but personal accolades do mean something to her. And I think also she's never really forgiven the English press for labelling her a flop at the start. She's made that pretty clear. She has a bit of an axe to grind, and she does often, reference it in her sort of, in her interviews. A lot. I'm on. So I think it's 50. 55 goals now, I think, in sort of 69 appearances, and then a further sort of 14 assists or something. So it's a goal or assist every game. Well, if that's a flop, then I'd quite like Romelu Lukaku to start flopping in that way, if that is an option.
Rob, I've just left this question on screen. It's from John, Man United supporter. Is the current situation regarding Chelsea's takeover have potential to affect Chelsea's summer? Obviously, I know you won't have too much information, but maybe just your opinion on this one.
I mean, it's interesting you say I don't have too much information because I've been chatting to the new owner. I actually have had the pleasure of meeting the new owner. But no, I will say that from what I understand, it's sort of business as usual in that regard. Now that everything is sort of done, there are players that Chelsea are sort of talking to. In terms of the players that were leaving, Drew Spence was sort of, that nearly happened in January. That was sort of preempted. Jonna Andersson made it pretty clear she wanted to go back home in January. And again, that was sort of preempted. And the same, from what I understand, Ji So-Yun, that dates back to COVID because she had quite a difficult time with COVID and with, family being ill. And so as a result of that, I understand that sort of, is a desire to be closer to home. But yeah, from what I understand, Chelsea's summer is business as usual. Certainly the new owners have been really, really bullish and sort of very positive about Chelsea women. To be honest, I think, with any person who takes over at Chelsea, if they dare challenge Emma Hayes, they'll probably, the fandom will like to turn on the ownership before they turn on Emma Hayes. Quite happily, I just let Anna Hayes decide everything. To be honest, she probably has a better idea than some of our board. But anyway, that's another point. But yeah, no, I don't think so. I mean, I know Chelsea have almost wrapped up a couple of signings, but I have to keep tight lips on those because technically we can't negotiate. But there is, as we all know, the world of football is often quite clandestine, and there is stuff going on. Someone else asked about Maren Bielda at one point. She has a contract on the table. I understand she's likely to maybe extend for one more year. From what Chelsea intended to use her quite a lot more this year than they did, but because of her injuries and recurrences of the injuries, and at her age, they wanted to ensure she had the best chance of being fully fit for the Euros, because this is like to be our last ever international tournament. And in a way, I kind of, I would have liked to have seen Maren out there a bit more on a personal level, because I really like Maren Bielda. I think she's a brilliant player. She's an amazing personality, and she's a just model pro. But at the same time, I would rather see a player's, maintained and given a chance to play that international tournament than, forced back in and maybe pick up an injury and then missing, what potentially is going to be a great moment for them.
You're saying that the fans would obviously back Emma Hayes up, and I think so with the media, which kind of leads me just onto one quote that Karen Carney said, and it kind of surprised me a little bit. I don't know if you saw it after the game, but Karen Carney has already tipped Man City to win the title next season, which is obviously a bold statement, but I can understand why. I think if I got the league somewhere here, so what's that? About 9 points behind they finished. Bearing in mind the amount of injuries they had this season, to only finish 9 points behind, it just kind of make you think that City will be there or thereabouts next season. Obviously, a lot can happen over the summer, and it's not always that easy. But are you kind of worried a little bit, Rob, about Man City next season?
I wouldn't say worried. I don't really worry about any side. All I will say is I think, the real attraction for me about the WSL compared to other European leagues is that, I expect United and Spurs to kick on. I'm not necessarily sure how much they will kick on, but I think they will kick on again next year. I think City, Arsenal and Chelsea will all be in and around it next year. There is now a core group of teams, I think, that are starting to become competitive at the top. And that is what we really need, because in order for it to grow and it really take advantage of that TV deal, we don't need one side just, steamrolling their way to the title. It can't become like La Liga Femenina, which gets a lot of unfair stick and is actually really, really competitive beneath Barcelona, where they are so, ridiculously ahead of other sides. And as a result of that, you get fans, on social media that are up in arms when they concede one in a 6-1 loss, when they're moaning and saying, we need to sack the defence. Like, that is exactly what the WSL doesn't need. Because if, it becomes like that, you're going to lose that interest. And there's not going to be things like the final day where realistically for that final, 45 minutes, the title went down to the final 45 minutes. And you don't get that anywhere else. And I think that's what, really makes the WSL, I'm not going to say the best league in the world because I think that's a stupid term. I think, qualifying anything as the best league in the world is stupid. But I will say it certainly makes, I think, the most entertaining league. And I think that's, the thing that really needs to be drilled in, especially with the big TV deal.
Yeah, I think, I agree with that, especially the way you describe the WSL there. I think the same, yeah. We're going to move on a little bit halfway through the show. We want to come up with 5 things. Well, me and Connor's come up with 4 things. Hopefully, Rob can come up with one other at the end. So we've still got a bit of thinking time just yet about what we kind of need to do to make that step from 4th to 3rd now. So I think it's been very good. We've established ourselves from our very first season in the WSL as 4th place, and then obviously we backed it up the previous season, only finishing 1 point behind Arsenal. We was there or thereabouts again this season, but obviously slipped away in the last 3 or 4 games. So kind of just starting off with yourself. We might as well start off with the one on the thumbnail about we needed a more clinical striker. Well, 2 of them. Russo absolutely fine, but we need someone else to score if she doesn't. So I think you would agree with that one, wouldn't you, Connor?
Yeah, and I think that's it. It's not about replacing Russo. It's about getting someone else who can do it. I mentioned the kind of players that Chelsea have got up top. It's same with City, same with Arsenal. The amount of players that can score, we don't seem to have that. Now, I think Martha Thomas, I don't want to just single her out, so I'm going to mention other players, but Martha Thomas is an example. She's been fantastic from the right, but if you actually have a look, I'm going to use the stat again, John, even though I say I don't like it. I'm starting to like it a little bit. I believe she's actually 7th in the league for expected goals. I think her expected goals from like 7 or 8, but she's only scored like 4, I think, something like that. Now, obviously, a lot of those would have come from the chance against Villa. Obviously, she had 3 golden ones, and so that would have put it up. But it's the same for a couple of... I think Leah Galton's expected goals is a lot higher than what she's actually scored. Now, I'm not saying you have to score every single goal, but you look at like Sam Kerr or Miedemar, Beth Hemp, whoever it is, they're kind of level with what they're expected, whereas our players are significantly lower than what their expected goals would show. Now, that shows that we're creating the chances. We're just not putting some of these away. Now, that obviously would then lead to your attacking ability and your shooting ability. So that's where I think we do need somebody. Obviously, Senior Brun could have been that, but we've not seen anything of her really since she's come in. Obviously, hopefully she comes back after the summer and gets a proper run out. But I'd argue we need 3. I think we need 2 or 3 to come in this summer alongside Russo, Galton, and Martha Thomas and Ella Toon as well. I don't think you just need 1. I think you need 2 as well, because I said that is the difference right there. You bring Harder on against Villa, and you give her those chances. She's scoring 1 or 2 of them minimum. So I think that's the small differences. You get a striker that can do that. And I always say this. It's the typical Michael Owen quote, isn't it? Goals win your games and all that. But it also takes the pressure off your defenders. You don't concede so many late goals if you're 2 or 3-0 up. And if you do concede, it doesn't really matter. If you're only 1 goal up because you can't kill the game off, you're then relying on your defence, which for us this season has been... I mean, we haven't had a stable back 4 for more than 6 or 7 games, really. So when you take that as well, if we can start killing off games, then we wouldn't be conceding these late goals and then obviously subsequently these draws as well. So I think it fixes so many issues, just having people that can score, because it takes your pressure off your defenders as well.
To me, there's 2 names that really, really stand out. Firstly, again, she's had a poor season this year, but I think in general the side has, in terms of Claire Emsley. She is, I think, a really good forward. She's someone who can play, link up well, has a real turn of pace, which I think at times is something United I've seen do lack, that little real turn right in the last kind of third. And she knows the league quite well. I'm not necessarily thinking she's going to be like a sort of 15-plus goal striker, but even if she's coming in and, say, contributing 8 or 9, it's good numbers. Obviously, the numbers this year have been poor, but I think that's partly down to Everton and the fact she's been used often as sort of a substitute has been bizarre. The other one, and the one I really, really... I spent a long time asking why, Arsenal weren't playing her, was Caitlin Ford. I think Caitlin Ford is brilliant. Can come in off the right, off the left, a really good finisher, has a bit of a turn of pace, isn't bad in the air. And, a lot of the time Arsenal were using Nikita Paris and Heath ahead of her this season. And I think, Ford, when she has actually played, more often than not, she's scored or assisted. For a lot of the first half of the season, she wasn't getting used at all. And, she's out of contract. I think, you give her the chance to go in there, be maybe in that front 3. Let's assume, you've got Kuhn, Russo, and, someone, maybe Signa Brun in there. And then you put, Ford, say, coming in off the left or off the right. You say Russo on the other wing and Brun up front, assuming she stays in 2 in behind. I think then you've got plenty of players there that can get you, can get into double figures, realistically. And I think, she's the one who, to me, really stands out as the sensible transfer. I would say Beth England, so I think Beth England would be, but I don't think Beth England wants to leave Chelsea. She made it pretty clear at Christmas she wasn't happy and she started playing more minutes since then. And it's quite telling that, Beth England has performed best this season when she's been up front with Sam Kerr and when Fran Kirby's not been around. If they're trying to manage Fran Kirby's minutes more and more, which looks like they're going to need to do with this fatigue issue, then suddenly there's even more of that slot for Beth England. And it also means Sam Kerr sometimes plays in off the left. And she really likes playing off the left because it means she can dip in behind the left back and the centre back. And that gives, makes it even harder for you to pick her up.
It's definitely something that we need because that right-hand side is never actually been locked down. Tooney started off the season out there. Russo's had a bit of time out there. We want Hanson and Fuso. Martha Thomas has pretty much finished the season there quite strongly as well. But it's definitely a position that's up for grabs. I don't, providing Galton's with us next season, I'm sure she'll still be first choice on that side. And obviously Tooney, you'd think that she would be on that starting 11 as well. Even that competition for place is of course important. But yeah, I mean, I would take that someone who's that established in the WSL on that right hand side supporting. I think that would definitely be a step forward. Yeah. Kind of the next one that we come up with is just squad depth, and the reason why I mentioned this is because one thing that has been criticised, one thing Skinner's been criticised for this season is not making enough subs or not making them early enough. Now, at the start of the season, Skinner was criticised for absolutely everything, but I think gradually the fan base has kind of criticised him less, but the substitution thing has carried on throughout the whole season. Now, I'm fully aware that he doesn't want to go out there and lose games. He's obviously not choosing to make substitutions because he believes 75% fit player who start in the start 11 is still more important to him or more useful than someone who's on the bench or else who would make that substitution. You know, I'm also fully aware that by bringing someone on, yes, they're going to add positives to the game, but you've also taken away someone who's in the starting 11 who would obviously be, you know, more beneficial. However, we do need to be in a position where we can make like-for-like swaps when someone's getting tired or losing concentration or something. You know, we need to be able to make those changes. So kind of on when you talk about squad depth, you know, we've got a team of 23, 24. There's quite a few vacancies there, in my opinion. There's players who could have played last season who we didn't see much of. But I guess the first question would be is how many changes can you see us making?
Yeah, I need to be careful what I say because it's all we've got depth, but we don't have quality depth. Is probably the best way I think I can put it and I think Skinner's recognised that this season. I think if you look at our bench against Chelsea, there's probably only 2 or 3 at most that we get into any other top 3 side on the bench, I think. So when you're looking at it like that, yeah, great, we've got loads of depth, and I think Skinner's been criticised because we don't bring them on, but are they going to make... They'll add energy, sure, because they've not played for, and the other players have played for 60, 70 minutes. So, yeah, they can have energy. But do they have that quality that is currently on the pitch at the moment? I don't think so. And like I said, that's when you look at the changes Chelsea made at half time. I mean, they're almost taking the mick with the changes that they can bring on. It's just ridiculous. So I think that's the difference. So when you're talking about how many, I think Nat said this as well. I think this is the kind of summer where you'll see, whether this women's side is going to be backed or not. Because I think Skinner's shown this season that he deserves to be. The squad, like I said, that's 4th again. So it needs that little bit extra. And the thing is, you start buying top 3 level players that go into your first team. Those players that are currently in our first team that drop to the bench, that's then good squad depth because we know that these players are capable for 4. So you can start rotating these current players in your games against your Aston Villas or your Leicesters and games like that. So that's where the difference is. We need to buy first-team players to drop some of these starters onto the bench, and then that's your rotation. I don't think we should be going out there looking for bench players for the sake of it because we've got loads of them. You may as well start putting the devs on the bench if you're going to do that because you need actual quality, and the only way of doing that is improving your first team because then your first-team squad gets bigger, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'll sort of give an example to this of the one that always sticks in my mind from a Chelsea perspective is that Chelsea had Beth England, who just won the Golden Boot during the COVID season, and had started the next season very well. Started that season, had been doing very, very well in that season. In that January window, Chelsea went out and bought Sam Kerr, and then in the summer window went out and brought Pernilla Harder. At the same time, they also, had Guro Wrighton available. Ramona Bachmann was still at the club at that point. There was a plethora of attacking options. But if you can upgrade, and this is where I think, I think a little bit Mark Skinner maybe needs to learn on this, is being a manager means you need to be cutthroat. I did an interview with Carly Telford a few years ago, and she sort of talked about when Emma Hayes first came back into Chelsea, and the first thing Emma Hayes did was put a list of players up on the wall. And she said at the end of the year, none of these players will still be here because we need to improve if we're going to get better. And on one hand, that might have really rattled the dressing room. But on the other hand, I think it made people realise that, hang on, if we want to be competing where we are, we need to kick on. And subsequently, that I think is why I find it very hard to challenge anything Emma Hayes does transfer-wise, even if I don't necessarily agree with it. Because I just know that she knows the squad inside and out. And I feel that Mark Skinner maybe hasn't got to that point yet. I think he's too... I don't think too nice is the right word, but I think he needs to just realise that having one world-class striker or one very, very good striker is not the way you win the WSL. It's by having that two really good strikers and that one good striker and being able to have that competition for places.
I'm sure Skinner would get these players if he could, and it's going to be a good, interesting summer because this is his first proper transfer window. I think the January transfer window was good. It's what we needed. We needed depth in defence because if we didn't, we already played Ladd and Zellum at the back for quite a few games since January, so we got Diane Caldwell, which was great. We had Sinja, unfortunately, she did get on the score sheet, but we still managed to get her on the pitch a little bit to obviously rest Russo when she needed resting. So yeah, and Jane Moore, unfortunately, again didn't play too much, but that wasn't down to her or anything about that. That was just down to injuries. But again, we needed that CDM kind of role. So I was really impressed with those kind of three players that we brought in. But this summer, we do need to be bringing in that quality. And I will ask you one more question on this, Rob. Obviously you never really experienced it being always in the Champions League spots, but it's going to be very hard to do what Conor said and bring in someone who's going to improve our starting 11 when we're not in Champions League. Is that a fair statement, or would you think that there's players out there in the European market who can improve?
Yeah, I think that's one of those things. Like, we traditionally, I think, have that view in the men's game because so many of the top men's players do want Champions League football. Yeah. In the women's game, I don't think it's quite as black and white as that. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the name Manchester United is going to attract players, as we've seen with people like Tobin Heath, Kristen Press, Hilda Burriso, Jackie Grueman, who are all top footballers. I think, it requires sensible scouting. It requires you to actually, go out and put the work in. There are gems in, things like the WSL Championship. There are gems in Germany. There are gems in Spain. There are players in France that are, very, very good players. And I think it's a combination of bringing those players in and not necessarily bringing players in that aren't going to be good enough. Because I think at times that's what Manchester United perhaps had a tendency to do. They brought in players that don't necessarily kick on. But for example, someone like Hannah Blundell, when she came in last summer, Blundell is a very, very good player and is a very solid player. She's a very solid fullback. What you then need to now be doing is saying, we've got Hannah Blundell, keep Blundell for a couple of years, and then after a couple of years, find the upgrade on Blundell. But the upgrade needs to be someone that's younger and on a similar level, so that when they come in, you're developing them, and you've also got an oven-ready player there. And that's one thing Chelsea have managed to do really, really well with Erin Cuthbert and Jessie Fleming. They had Melanie Leupolz, they've had Ji So Young, they've got Sophie Ingle and Drew Spencer in there. But they've also now got Erin Cuthbert and Jessie Fleming coming through that are now oven-ready to come into that side, so that now G is going. There is, not as much of a problem to replace them because you've got a similar sort of player in Jessie Fleming, who's had a year now to adapt and get used to the league.
Okay. Yeah, you talk about coming through. This is going to be my third point. It's about the development team. So this is a tough one. I thought this season we might have saw maybe Maria Edwards come in and get a bit more game time. She played really well this season. She played really well the season before. Obviously, we're not going to see Card in there, but there are other players around. So I'll just start putting up with Conor. How are we going to see, or not even see, how are we going to improve and develop these players to get them to a point where they can actually come into our senior team? Because there's going to be fans out there who's calling for it. Would they call for these devs over some of the Champions League players or Champions League names out there? I'm not too sure. But we do need to do something with them. They've just won the devs, they've won the double. So that the quality is there at this kind of level that they're at now. We just need to build on the level that they're at now.
It's really tough, isn't it? Because you get a real connection to your academy side, but at the same time, you can't just bring them all through. Certainly not when we're trying to break into the top three. That's the thing, isn't it? Like, what do fans want? Do they want us to break into the top three, or do they want us, 5 or 6 devs in next year's squad? I think you're going to have to, settle for one or the other. You can't have both, in my opinion. So 1 or 2, I think we'll get, some senior debuts next season, I'm sure. Depends, obviously, how our Conti group goes. If we get a tough one of them again, then we might not see any of them in there. It all depends. You've got to find the balance because you can't just throw them in especially when Skinner talks, really heavily about next season. It really is time to push on, and obviously, really, hopefully, ambitious. Obviously, in the summer market as well. Can we really afford to? We can't afford to start this. We've had an up and down season as it is. If we go into the start of next season and drop points early on, you could almost say, without City getting injured or a team getting injuries, we'll probably rule ourselves out of top 3 already. So we need to have a steady season. But I also agree you can't just leave the devs where they are because a lot of them are just far too good now for that level. It's all very well and good beating everyone 10-0 every week. You're not going to learn anything. I say this all the time. Like, you need to test yourself. So I'd like to see some of these girls go off together. I think there's a thing in the men's. I don't know what it's called. It's some work experience thing that Man United have been trialing, where they send 2 players off together to the same club and almost do like a work experience for a month or 2. So at least they're not going to a new club on their own. So they do have a partner with them. Yeah. So whether that's something United Women's could trial, sending 2 players off, to Blackburn or to whoever it is, kind of around Manchester, just for a month or 2, get them training with a different squad, get them playing the odd game or 2.
Dual registration would be something you should do, and I've said this. I think a lot of WSL sides increasingly need to do that because then if you really need to call back the player, you can. And you can call them back and play them. But otherwise, they go out and they get regular minutes and they get chances, to play senior football. And again, someone mentions Carrie Jones there, for example. Like, for me, there's no reason on earth Carrie Jones shouldn't be out on a dual registration, either at a top club in the W Championship or alternatively on loan at a club in, the lower half of the WSL playing, regular minutes. Because if you're good enough to play for your national side at that age, I find it very hard that they can't, be blooded in some minutes against, say, Birmingham or when you're a couple of goals up against Leicester or whatever. And this is the issue that I think, I said this to Chelsea fans, is that we can have some great young players. We've got some really good ones, like Fox, Ormond, Wardlaw, but they've gone out on loan. Ormond's done a year at Crystal Palace. Wardlaw's got promoted with Liverpool. Fox has done 6 months at Charlton. They're going to come back with that senior experience that you don't get playing dev football. And you don't get the same physicality at dev football on the men or the women's side. It is, I hate to say it, but a little bit too nice. You don't get, the veteran sort of 35-year-old snarling centre-back flying in to attack along the centre-forward. Or you don't have the big burly centre-forward, veteran centre-forward who used to play in the WSL and is now seeing out their career somewhere, challenging you as you're trying to play out from the back. And it's that kind of, I think, gap to bridge, that mental gap almost, that is where United lack a little bit. I'd say, you kind of saw that naivety, I think, at the beginning of the season in the game that Chelsea played at Leigh Sports Village. I'm sure, you probably don't want to remember that game. But I remember that one very well because what struck me was the naivety of that Chelsea scored 2 goals, pretty much the exact same thing, of you trying to play out from the back and falling straight into a press. And if players go out and have had that experience on loan and they know, right, someone's going to press me here, I've got to clear it, you negate the chance of them doing that in the senior side. And while I appreciate no player wants to make mistakes, every player will make mistakes at some point. And for younger players, it's better if they're making mistakes while they're out on loan, it's not a high-pressure situation for them, than if they're doing it, say, on the final day of the season when Manchester United need to win to get Champions League football. Because that mentally isn't going to benefit you at the age of 21.
There's 2 points there. There's the mentality point, and it can work both ways. You can go having a bad experience on loan is also a good thing as well, potentially for these players. It gets them used to that environment as well. They're not going to want to be back there. And same if they go for, let's say they go to a championship winning side. Yeah, that's also good because then they know how to win. But it's also the second point I wanted to make. It's the physicality more than anything. I say this about men's academies, and it translates across to women's as well. They're all technically gifted. That's not going to be the issue. They're all going to be very good on the ball. How are they mentally and how are they physically? Because take United devs for a prime example, beating Chelsea, to the league there. Beat Chelsea devs team. Let's say, great, you put Maria and obviously I know Conner's gone off, but you put them up against Millie Bright. You're not going to get the same outcome, are you? The size different. And same with a lot of the players, in the WSL, you're going to get a completely different experience. So that's why I say you can't just throw them into the WSL and go, right, yep, do the same things. They'll do well. They're good players. Like I said, technically on the ball, they'll be fine. But there's that physicality and the mentality difference. Yeah. And that's key. And that's what, like, we rave about it all the time. The loan system works, but you've got to have a good club to go to. It's no good just sending them somewhere for the sake of sending them.
Yeah. I will say Emily Ramsey will have learned much more this season being on loan and being in a relegation battle and having to battle for a shirt as well in a relegation battle at Birmingham than she would have going on loan to say, or, you know, playing in the dev side all year and keeping a record number of clean sheets. Because a situation like that for a goalkeeper is really, really difficult, because even if, you know, you're making outstanding saves week in, week out, you're still possibly losing games just because your defence aren't up there or whatever. And she will have learned that, you know, mentally. And that would be really interesting actually to see what happens actually with United's goalkeeping position, because obviously Ertz is there, I think, as the number one. But Bagley, I'm not necessarily sure she wants to sit on the bench for another year. I don't necessarily think it benefits her career to sit on the bench completely for another year. Maybe she thought she was going to get more chances to go for the number one jersey. I must admit, I've not seen enough of United or her in a United shirt to know, but I do know she's a very good goalkeeper. There's Ramsey. I think there's also someone else who's been on loan whose name evades me. Yeah, you've got 4 decent goalkeepers on the books. Realistically, there's one goalkeeping spot. You need a backup, and then you need a youngster, probably from the dev side. I don't know who your dev goalkeeper is, but they also need to be factored into this equation. So there's then 5 goalkeepers for that spot. So you've got to then make tough choices as to whether you go out and move on. And I think that's the stage United are now getting to, is tough choices need to be made. And sometimes fans won't like them. Sometimes it will be fan favourites that get moved on. Sometimes it will be, you know, your top young players will go elsewhere. But ultimately, that is the next stage in the progression that you have to just accept is one of those things on the way to becoming a top side.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you said. I love the loan system. I love the dual contract system. I just think that with the likes of some of the more experienced ones now, I don't even think championship loan is enough. I think they need to be playing in the WSL and just seeing exactly how they compete there, because potentially you're wasting another season, you know, just because they might do it in the championship, just like Maria Edwards did for Blackburn. She was there 2 seasons ago, done really well, and we're still seeing this season. So, you know, I would like to see people go on loan, players go on loan, WSL clubs. If you think they're good enough, let's have a look. You know, go to, you know, any club in the WSL just to see. I am conscious of time, so I know there's a question in the comments for Rob. So just briefly, Rob, I don't know if you've seen much of Maria Thomas-Dottir this season. Bit of a mixed bag with some fans. I think, you know, I think she's part of the game is fantastic. You know, I think, but then other parts, you know, it's like, oh, flipping hell, because here's a goal. It's one of those ones. She's
what I describe as a headache kick at centre back, and I mean that in, you know, the politest possible way. It is someone who, the core defensive aspects of the game, she's good at. She's, you know, decent in the air. She's a decent blocker. She can tackle quite well. She is not the sort of player that's going to turn and play a raking 45-yard out pass out from the back, or is going to, you know, sort of dribble out from the back and slip the ball through for one of your wingers. I think this is partly why Chelsea sold her, in all honesty. She's the sort of player who'd be good, I think, as our, you know, 5th choice centre back. But if I look at, for example, now our centre backs, I mean, Carter was brilliant this season. She stunned everyone, including me. Millie Bright is Millie Bright, and, you know, she's just there. Magda Eriksson is Magda Eriksson, she's just there. Aniek Nouwen's the one who really, really impressed me this season, because when Nouwen stepped in, you know, you didn't really notice Magda Eriksson was gone, and that previously has been our big Achilles heel. At the same time, we've then also got Mara Mielda nowadays, who can play as 5th choice sort of centre back. When you've got a player like on Mielda's ability that can be 5th choice centre back, you know, that's a ridiculous situation to find yourself in. Or Sophie Ingle can even have been there as, you know, as 5th choice centre back. Like, I think for Thomas-Dottir needed to go out and play regular minutes, but if United really want to kick on and play in the Champions League, she's probably good enough to keep as a squad player, that she's someone you need to be looking at and saying that's a position we can improve on.
Yeah, I was muted. Oh, sorry, John. I don't know whether you were going to say something else. I need to stop coughing first. Yeah, I think it's something we spoke about most of the show, really. The 4th point is winning mentality. Because I still question. Every player, and when I say this, I'm not saying that none of the players want to win. Every single player that plays for any professional team or semi-professional team will want to win, but it's having that belief that you can win in those moments. Like I said earlier in the show, Chelsea are champions because of that mentality, because of that. Oh, which I said that to you, John, when we went 2-1 up. They ain't going to be worried about this. They'll be like, yeah, well, it's fine. We've been here before. And that's the difference. United, when we get to that position, we have the opposite. So, for example, when we were 1-0 up away at West Ham, we're like, yeah, we've been here before, and we keep drawing. So that's what they've got in the back of their mind, and we can see the late set piece, and that's the worry then, because it's in their heads all the time that, oh, we go 1-0 up late on, oh, we know what happens here. And we don't seem to have that belief. So, obviously, when we had Willie Kirk on, I keep using his quote where he said, can Skinner turn this squad into winners, or does he need to buy winners elsewhere to make this squad a winning team? I think it's a mix of both. I think some of these players have got that mentality. I don't think all of them have. And that's where you buy just a few. I've got no issue with us buying. And when I say experience, I think Charlie said this. Experience isn't just buying 30-year-old players because that's their age. You buy experienced winners. You buy kind of your 24 to 28s that have won trophies elsewhere, that know what it's like to win. WSL quality players. It's going to be difficult because you can't. We're not going to be buying Chelsea's best players, for example. That's just not going to happen. So yeah, it is tough, but we, like I said before, if we're ever going to break into top 3, we need to buy top 3 level players who have done it and have won things elsewhere, because I don't think we've got enough of that in this squad. So that's the main thing. That's why we dropped it this season. We can analyze it all we want. It's mentality that's let us down. It's not the quality. I think the quality, you could argue maybe we're 4th best squad in the league, and maybe we are, but we did have enough at the time to get over the line. We've seen it in the games that we've dropped points. We had enough. You could argue, like I said, yes, City, wouldn't have had drop points with those injuries, but they did, and we were in that position. But like I said, our mentality let us down. So I think that's going to be the key thing over the summer. Obviously, once the Euro, and it'll be good to see some. Obviously, it's going to be difficult because only one team can win it. But just having our players have good Euros, I think, is important. If England have a bad one, that's 3 or 4 of our players coming home early. But if a lot of our players can get far in the tournament, that'll do them well as well. Obviously, mixed in with good recruitment. But yeah, that's the main thing for me that we need to work on into next season is mentality, because that's 2 seasons in a row. And I said this to you, John. A lot of these players have been here before. Like I think I said to somebody in the comments earlier, this is not Skinner's squad yet. This is Casey's scope. Funny, I'll get my words out. That's because I got a bad throat. It's Casey's squad. Too many S's. And a lot of these players that have just missed out this season missed out the season before. So that's twice now. So, like I said, you've got to look at the mentality sometimes. So, yeah, I just think we need to add to that and work on that next season. We'll be all right.
Do you want to come in on that one, Rob, and then bring in your point as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of my point does link actually to winning mentality, but I'll come on to that in a moment. But I think someone mentions Real Madrid in the comment section. I would try and avoid like-for-like comparisons with someone like Real Madrid, because Real Madrid, the reason why they're going, so heavily at it is because Barcelona are doing so well. And every time Barcelona do well at anything, Real Madrid get annoyed. So, but there could be, the World Chess Championships. Barcelona could finish 7th in it. Real Madrid could not have a competitor in it, and a year later they'd have Gary Kasparov playing for them. So that's the sort of, ridiculous situation you're sort of dealing with. One thing I will say is that, and I did say this last year, is that at the end of the game, I had a chance to speak to Hannah Blundell when she came around. She was very well received by the Chelsea fans. I wasn't expecting. She was well hacked off at losing. And, I spoke to her and I sort of had a good laugh with her because her parents are Chelsea fans. I didn't know this. And I sort of said, at least your parents are happy. And she says, yeah, but I'm not. That's the sort of mentality that United need to be bringing in, and having that mentality in the dressing room. And someone mentioned Drew Spence in the sort of comment section. I'm not necessarily sure Spence is the sort of player to come in and play week in, week out at United, and that's why I don't necessarily think she'd want to go there, because I think she wants to go there for regular minutes. But that's the sort of name you need in that dressing room, where Drew Spence has been there and done that, has seen practically everything on Chelsea's rise. So she will know exactly what the right thing to do is at the right time. He is a good player. I think Chelsea are moving her on more for the fact that They just need to bulk up the squad, and the squad players need to be slightly better where Chelsea are at this moment in time. But that doesn't make her a bad player. People like Ford as well. Ford has won stuff for Australia, has sort of been there and sort of done that. Emsley's won stuff before in her career. It's those sort of mentalities and those names. I know Lucia Garcia was mentioned. I think, she's had success with Bilbao in the Cup. When you start getting those players in and you start building that mentality, it then becomes a lot more easy to, bring players in who immediately adopt that mentality. And you look at Chelsea, for example, I sort of say you had the winning squad and then you added Sam Kerr and Pernilla Harder to it. Like Jesse Fleming did an interview and said Pernilla Harder's ridiculous in training because she's the most technically talented of the squad, but she also is the hardest worker. And, when they do free kick practices, everyone will do 20 and Pernilla Harder will sit there and do like 50 because she wants to endlessly just chase that perfection. And I think that's, what United need to get to. And moving on to sort of the fifth point, I think, this links to it, is winning ugly. I think United far too often this year have lack that bit of streetwise knowledge. They lack the ability to win dirty. They're too nice. Things like, Sunday, for example, if that's Chelsea and they're in a situation like that, I guarantee you about a minute into the first half, Sophie Ingles just kicking someone and conceding a free kick, is just disrupting play in some way, shape or form. Yeah. There wasn't ever, to me, that feeling. And this was what I was actually quite pleased in a way to play United on the final day, is that City, for example, on the final day, I know City have got those players in there, those masters of the dark art. Steph Horton, is the one who immediately comes to mind. Horton is brilliant at those sly little fouls and those little digs, as is Philippa Angeldal and Vicky Losada. They're those sort of players. Arsenal probably have the master in it in the league in Leah Walty. How Leah Walty manages to go through so many games without getting yellow cards, it's sort of, Fernandinho level evasion on a grand scale. Sophie Ingles, another one of them. If United start getting those players where, a 1-0, they can give away that cheap free kick, but defend the cheap free kick, get on, the break, score the second, kill the game. Suddenly, you're looking at a complete different situation. And I think that's, to me, is where, United do still lack that gap. There have been a lot of games this season where you've been leading by a 1-goal margin and you've either been pegged back to draw or sometimes been pegged back to lose. And if you look at those points all do add up. And it's those situations like that where if you can, the difference between a win and a draw, it may not seem like much in the men's game because obviously it's a bit further advanced, but in the women's game, where titles and positions can be decided, by 1 to 3 points, and it means absolutely everything.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's something I've been banging the drum about all season. About that we're too. I've said that since the first game of the season. I think we're too nice. You could just one game as an example. City away when we lost 1-0. Obviously, that game swung it back in City's favour. Really, even though we still had the gap, that could have gone. I think we could have gone 7 clear of them or 5 clear of them. Instead, it went to 2, and obviously it was back in their favour. Really, when you looked at the run-in. But that game, every time we got the ball in the final third, we panicked. And we just hit it long and there was nobody there every time. Rather than drawing a foul, like if the players could just, I'm not saying dive, but draw the foul in, be clever enough to do that or break up the play. Harder's goal against, I use this as an example all the time. Harder's goal against Chelsea earlier in the season, just bring her down. Like, I know it's going to be hard.
Which one of the two of them, just so I can clarify?
You know which one I'm talking about. She ran from halfway. Now, it's a brilliant goal, don't get me wrong, but somebody's got to take the yellow card there and take her out. And we've seen that a couple of times this season with United. We let players just walk through it. Caroline Weir, her goal against that 1-0 game against someone go into her. Like,
same at the weekend with that allowing G to turn and pick that pass in the build-up to that third goal. Like, I can assure you, if that's Sophie Ingle up the other end, Ingle's just, barging her to the floor, taking the yellow and starting again from play. And it's that sort of player that I do just... I've tried, they're very rare in world football, the ones that are really, really good. And that's why I think, they are such a commodity. People don't think about them, and you never think about them when they're around. They're just sort of there. But when they're missing, it's when you realise it. And to me, if United can get someone like that, where you can then start, and especially if there's someone who's a real winner, like someone who hates losing and just, detests it with a passion, that is an even bigger bonus because you suddenly then help, that mentality issue as well.
Yeah, because I think people misunderstand this sometimes when you're saying the darkest. People just assume, oh, just go and snap everybody. That's not what it is. It's like I say, it's drawing fouls. It's little things like, oh, if you're trying to time waste, just kick the ball like 5 yards down the line when the opposition taking a throw. Little things like that.
Yeah.
It all adds up in a game. Like I said, all season we've not done it. It's great that we've got a really likable team, but we'll like them more, if we get into the top 3. And that's the thing. It's the little margins in football. Football, I sound like Skinner here. Football's all those, those little percentage margins. This is just another percent that you can knock away, just by these little things. And we will do it, but it's personal. It's mentality. Yeah. It's like I just said in the last one. It's having that winner's mentality to win at all costs, not just, oh, well, if I don't do that, I'm not going to look great. Well, sod that. Go and win the game. It reminds
me of something Anna Hayes said about Erin Cuthbert last year. And I think, it's come true this season, is that she said, Cuthbert's a brilliant player. She's got all the energy. She now needs to be an absolute bastard to play against. And she needs to be that sort of player that you look at her on the team sheet and think, oh, bloody hell, I don't want to come up against her. Because if you're in the midfield and you're an opposition midfielder and you then see her name on there and you think, I'm going to spend all game. She's going to chase me around. She's going to bite at my ankles. And, when she breaks, she's going to be going through from the midfield. I'm going to have to chase back. Suddenly, you've got that mental aspect of it. You put doubt in players' minds. And this is what I think a lot of people do forget. Football, for all of it being, a technical sport, a lot of it is mental. And this is also where I think, Boone and Russo can improve. And they will when they get older, I think, is that being that ability to play with their back to goal and the ability, to draw those little fouls on the halfway line. That was what really sort of surprised me, I think, a little bit, especially in the second half, is the amount of times the ball was just being sort of punted towards Russo. And Russo wasn't necessarily trying to hold it up or sort of challenge for it, because I don't think she had that mental capacity that she was just, Millie Bright's either going to clatter me. Yeah. McCabe, no one wants to play against her. That's just because you're likely to end up with a broken ankle. But with sort of Toon and Russo, I think if they can do that sort of, style of their game and start building that in, that takes so much pressure as well off your midfield and your defence. And then you can start, reforming the lines, managing everything. And it looks, quite good.
Yeah, 100%. And just the last point on that for me, Rob made a perfect thing that people forget the mentality side of football, just sport in general as well. And the one thing, the best example again I can give, and I tweeted about this at the time, when Stanway came back after her ban. Now, don't get me wrong, straight red obviously on Leah. When she came back after that, watch how many players didn't go as close to her. And that kind of thing. That's not what you really want, but it works. And she had more time on the ball to do what she wants then. And someone mentioned McCabe. Now, you don't get me wrong, these are known as the dirty players, I guess. But players second-guess themselves sometimes. Not every player. World-class players won't even think about who's around them. They'll just do what they do. But some players will think about that and go, oh, hang on, do I want to get too near them? I don't want to end up with... or do I know what that person does, so I might change it, and they start second guessing themselves. So that's what these little 1% can do. It can upset the opposition. That's what we don't do enough. We don't disrupt the opposition enough. Like when Chelsea equalised at the weekend, we should have just been breaking up the play, just drawing little fouls. Not on the edge of the box. We don't want to be giving Chelsea all these chances, but just because Chelsea was so dominant, the only way of regaining some kind of control is just break it, frustrate Chelsea, start kicking them for a bit, drawing, giving away free kicks. When they're doing the free kicks, just stand in front of it for a few seconds to annoy me and take the sting out of the game. We just let Chelsea just keep coming over us, and it just, it turned into what it did. So it's those little percentages, and it upsets the opposition then.
Definitely, yeah. We have been going for around 15 minutes, so we'll call it a day there. Thank you to everybody in the comments. Rob, thank you for coming on again. Congratulations once again, and best of luck in the cup final. I still don't know who I want to win, or I don't know anybody fans in the comments. I saw one at the very start of the show saying it's a lose-lose kind of situation for a United fan, but no, it's been very good to have you back on, Rob. You'll have to have a word to Alina. I hope she's okay and she can come back on the show sometime soon. One last thing, Rob, you looking forward to the Euros?
Yeah, going to be fantastic. Got tickets for a number of games, and anyone I would recommend, if you can get tickets, because go and enjoy what I'm sure will be really good. I will say my particular favourite I'm looking forward to is the England-Norway game, when I've realised that there's the likelihood that England's defence is going to come up against Wrighton, Hansen, and Heidelberg, which is going to be the real acid test to me as to whether we can win anything. Because the fact Gura Wrighton is the worst player in that front three, and she's, not exactly bad herself, is quite a terrifying prospect.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Look, we've got to shoot off. Thank you, everybody, once again, and we shall see you again tomorrow. Thank you, guys.